Transposition is a big topic in the French horn world, but it's also a topic for a lot of other band instruments as well. But before I talk about how you actually transpose, I want to talk a little bit about why we even need to read music like this in the first place. Also, this is probably going to be a multi-part video, so follow to make sure that you see the rest of them. Way back before there were any valves on the French horn, if you wanted to change keys, you would need to change out entire instruments, or at least a little part of it on the end called a crook. These natural horns could only play one set of notes at a time, and even if you could get a fully chromatic set of pitches from them, you would have to do it by changing your hand position, and that would also change the tone of each note. Instead, it made a lot more sense just to grab the crook for whatever key you needed to play in at that rehearsal, pop it into your horn, and boom, now you're playing in the same key as everybody else in the orchestra. But here's the problem. If you were to write their parts out in concert pitch, you would end up with all of these weird accidentals, and different notes would be opened and closed depending on what crook you had in. It would be really confusing. Instead, composers just said, well, I'll tell you what key instrument to bring to rehearsal at the top of the page, and then I'll just tell you what partial to play by writing everything as if it were in C major. A major symphony, A major crook. D major symphony, D major crook. C minor symphony, well, that one's a little bit trickier. You need to bring the relative major, E flat major crook, but you get the idea. And that's the system we still use for most romantic and classical music from the 19th century and earlier. So how do we actually transpose? Well, I want to make this video usable for anybody trying to learn how to transpose. So I'm going to focus on getting from a transposed part to concert pitch, or C, first. But if you're a French horn player and you want to know how to do F specifically, I'll talk about that at the end of the video. And don't worry, it's basically the same process as getting the concert pitch. Let's say for the sake of argument that you have a trumpet in the key of B flat. Well, the note B flat is one whole step lower than the note C. So if a trumpet player sees a G and goes to play that note on the trumpet is going to lower that note by a whole step, and then you're going to hear an F come out of the bell. And you can do this process with any instrument. F is a fifth lower than C, so F horn sounds a fifth lower than it's written. E flat is a sixth lower than C, so E flat alto saxophone sounds 1/6 lower than written. A clarinet sounds a third lower. So as long as you can identify the interval between the instrument key and concert pitch, then you can transpose that part. So French horn players, you are going to do the same thing, except it's going to be compared to the note F instead of C. Horn in A, like in Beethoven's 7, well, A is a third higher than F, so this written G is going to be played as a B natural, which is a third higher. The most common transpositions you need to be aware of are C basso, which is down a fourth, and B flat basso, which is down a fifth, D, which is down a minor third, E flat and E, which are down a whole step and half step respectively, G, which is up a major second, A, which is up a major third, and B flat alto, which is up a fourth. But the only way to really learn how to do this is to practice it. Play your music in different keys and practice transcribing horn parts to famous symphonies by hand until you can do it by sight. There are some tricks that you can learn to make transposing certain keys a little bit easier, but I don't think there's any method faster and more efficient than just practicing until you have full transposition literacy. Lastly, I want to answer a couple of common questions that come up about transposition. This topic is so controversial for whatever reason that it is actually a banned topic on the Facebook group Horn People, which is really stupid, but I digress. Either way, transposition is here to stay, and it's a really useful and important skill for any musician to have. Question number 1, it's the 21st century, why don't we all just read and write and play in concert pitch? And yeah, this sounds intuitive and it would be ideal. In fact, I try to only think and hear in concert pitch because it is so confusing and hard to communicate with other musicians as I'm transposing from A to F to C. It's really messy. However, first of all, it would be a huge typographical nightmare to try and transpose every single part to every single symphony and all of the pedagogical materials and just anything that you can think of. It would be a nightmare to try and get all of that stuff in the back catalog of classical music into concert pitch. IMSLP.org is already riddled with people attempting to do just this, but often the parts are just as confusing and hard to read as if they were the originals. I'd rather use what the conductor wrote and figure it out from there. Also, anybody who doubles instruments knows how useful transposition is. If you play saxophone, soprano, alto, tenor, bari, then you know that it is incredibly valuable that you don't have to learn a new set of fingerings for each instrument. It's easier for most of us to have the fingerings and the way that we learn the instrument match up with the visual on the page and worry about the sounding note later. Question number 2, do I really need to learn how to transpose to be a horn player? If you want to go to music school for music education or music performance, yeah, you need to learn how to transpose. If you want to be a top tier professional musician, yep, you need to learn how to transpose. But even if you're a hobbyist and you just want to play along with your favorite symphonies, or maybe you want to read along and follow along with a score, transposition is going to be really helpful. If you want to make your own arrangements of music, or you want to write out a part for a friend of yours that plays a different instrument to play with you, then you're going to need to know how to transpose. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that for most of these groups you need to be able to transpose perfectly on site. That's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, I wrote in the notes for years when I was in youth symphony, and I think that if you need to do that at the stage of development that you are as a musician, then yeah, you should be able to do that with no judgment. Everyone should do what they need to do to sound good and play music with others. Transposition is just one of many skills that a musician needs to fully engage with their art, especially if you're a French horn player.